Well, Grit got the name at summer camp. He went to summer camp with the same people every summer, and they played music together. They fooled around together. As you know, Grit, they joked around a lot. So they were really into playing with kids' names. So they started calling him Billy Groat, just for fun, because kids like to play with sounds. And it eventually developed to Groat, and then it changed into Grit. And I don't think he was probably more than maybe 11 or 12 years old, and he's had the name since, long before John Wayne and True Grit. And it's always such a letdown to tell that story, really, because you think there's some magical story behind it, but it's just children playing with words and sounds of words. And he couldn't be more opposite of what you would think of as a persona as Grit, because he's the most easy to get along with. He is not Grit-like in any way, except that he's funny and charming, but not abrasive at all. We were in our early 20s, and we met at Fiddler's Green.
Oh, you did?
And we had been, which is a coffee house, many years ago. I came every Tuesday and Friday night. Eventually, I helped around the club, and I got to know all of the friends of Fiddler's Green, and Grit and Tam and Jim Strickland. They began each evening, and there was a huge fan club for Grit even then, because they would start off the evening, and everyone would say, "Oh, I wonder what Grit's going to sing tonight." And I met him there, and we became friends. And every Christmas, Tam would invite anyone who didn't have anywhere to go at Christmas time. And of course, those people who didn't celebrate Christmas were prime targets. Plus, he was so generous that he would invite anybody from out of town or anyone who didn't have a family. And Tam, being an immigrant himself, understood what it would be like at these holiday times without a place to go or a family. So he would invite whoever would be around, and one year, one Christmas time, he invited Grit and I to come separately. And we had always been friends, but ever since then, it was maybe about 2 months later that we moved in together, and the rest is history. We got married that August, which was in 1976, and have been married ever since. Well, you know, it just happens naturally. He's not the kind of person who can tell jokes. He forgets most of any jokes he hears. But he tends to be able to pick up on situations, and he's also really great at using props, anything that's around. But his humor is more spontaneous. So he's so quick. He's so incredibly brilliant that and of course he'll roll his eyes when I say that, but he really is. He picks up on cues and nuances and little things that people will say, but he certainly has a serious side. But he is funny even when he's not on in public. He's funny even around the house. He really is. But he's not the kind of person who gets obnoxious, because he knows when to stop. And there are many people, for example, at the Woods Music and Dance Camp, which we have run for many years along with our friend Eve Goldberg and previously Sue Goldberg. Some people who see him there think he's only funny, because he's funny the whole time. And when he says something serious and he sings a serious song, they're all shocked, because they've never seen that side of him. So he has both sides, really. That's a pretty difficult thing to explain, how Grit's mind works. Well, maybe what I could preface that by saying that a number of years ago, when I was a consultant, an educational consultant, I used to try many things out on Grit. So, for example, if I was teaching a group of teachers about learning styles, I would submit the test. I would make Grit take the tests that I would give to the teachers for them to work on with their children. And every time I gave him any kind of a learning style or any aptitude kinds of tests so that I could see how they would apply in the educational setting, he always came out so well balanced in his right and his left brain. And I remember in the literature, it would always say that was very, very unusual. There's a very, very small percentage of people who are equally right and left-brained. So whereas he is amazing as a treasurer of every organization he's part of, and can think methodically through every single piece of inlay and measure down to the smallest millimeter, he's also a people person, and he's so creative. It's that balance that I think is so amazing that a lot of people don't have. And that's the only way I can express why I think he's brilliant, apart from the fact that he's also a people person too. And he cares really from the heart. And he's the kind of person who, when he really believes in something, he will do absolutely everything, leave no stone unturned until he achieves his goal, or he helps a person in need. And most often it's without anybody ever knowing anything about it. Well, I would always say to him, at one point I taught gifted students, and I would always say to him, well, you have the exact profile of a gifted student, of a gifted person. And he would always play that down. And he would always say, well, when something comes naturally, I feel really funny taking credit for it. But nonetheless, he really is incredibly brilliant. Well, you know, he's not that different from when he was now than when he was 20 years old, quite honestly. What's, I think, really appealing about Grit is he has this childlike, and it's not innocence, it's sense of wonder about the world. And he has always had that sense of wonder, which is another reason why people gravitate towards him. I think if you're a really positive person and you send off those kinds of vibrations, people are attracted to you. But he's always excited about new ideas. There is nobody I know who reads more than Grit. He reads a few books a week, and I'm talking about not just one genre, every genre. And he remembers what he reads. It's amazing. We have so many books in our home that we have people who come over, and we make lists of the books that people take with them, and they usually leave with maybe 10 books in a bag. And he loves to be able to go into his library, quote unquote, his office at home, and walk people through, talk to them a little bit. Well, what kind of books do you like to read? And then he'll start suggesting and pulling books off the shelves. And of course, none of them are in any kind of order. He knows where they all are, but he'll pick one from here and one from here and one from here. And then he has to talk about the books. So it's this sense of wonder and curiosity and intellectual stimulation coupled with the creativity that I think is so appealing, and has not changed since he was a young 20-year-old. Well, it's wonderful to have someone in your community who is a cheerleader for all of you, not just for himself, but for all folk music. He started Borealis, he worked on the CFMAs, even the Woods Music and Dance Camp, anything that has to do with folk music, he's an enthusiast about. And it's not even about Grit. It's about everybody else. It's about celebrating everyone else and trying to get the word out there to everyone. And he's so frustrated because when you listen on the radio, well, you don't hear folk music, and folk is a dirty word, and he wants to really change that. And he always wants to do better for the folk community. He sees himself as part of the folk community, and he admires so many people in the community. We have so many incredible friends. It is a community. And as a member of the community, he wants to do all he can to support the community. For a number of years, he worked in Mariposa but it was mainly from the craft end of things. I mean, he played at Mariposa, but he also worked in craft. He was quite close to Estelle Klein, and she valued his opinion about some of her choices. She valued a lot of people's opinions. She had quite a number of people around her who she would call upon to get their take on different ideas. One good example would be Mike Stevens and the Arts Can Circle. I remember her calling Grit when she heard Mike Stevens interviewed on the radio, and phoned him and said, "Is he for real? Is this somebody who we should support?" So he has been a consultant to a lot of people over the years when it comes to folk music. I remember even early on when he was working with Stan Rogers. I don't know if Ian Robb told the story about, I don't know if it related, but we were all part of the same group. And Stan would support Grit in his guitar making because he played his guitars, and he'd literally go out and get orders for Grit wherever he went. But he also wanted to sing folk music. He wanted to sing those big choruses, and he didn't have any songs in his repertoire in those days. So of course he wrote Barrett's Privateers so he could be part of that club. And he would always say to Grit, "Now Gritsky, what do you think about this? What do you think about this?" Because of course Stan loved hockey, but he also loved Grit. So Gritsky was a real honor to be called Gritsky by Stan Rogers. But I think people value his opinion. So for many, many years, whether it's in guitar making or folk music, people value his opinion and ask him for ideas. I remember him writing articles for his trade magazines, craft magazines, or starting a huge association called the Association for String Instrument Artisans. And what did he do for that organization? He wrote the Code of Ethics. So there's people all over who know of him through not just his guitar making, his music as well. Grit can get along with anyone. He really can. I've taken him to many educational conferences. As a matter of fact, I belong to an organization that puts on a huge reading conference. Who do they care about coming to this conference with me to the banquet every year? Grit. Because what is Grit going to talk to them about? What books have you read lately, Grit? Can you give us a list? And I am asked to give a list of the latest books that Grit has written. It doesn't matter where he goes, people love him. And so Grit the husband, I'm the luckiest person in the world to be his wife.